Today, I'm going to introduce you to the highest ranked Chinese American state elected official in the state of California. So he's a very, very dedicated member of our C100 and been friends of us for years and has been doing a wonderful job for the state of California as the controller. So, but I personally think that he will be a better treasurer instead of controller. So, so in June you can cast your vote, and do it again in November. So without further ado, we will all give a round of applause and welcome to our state controller, John Chiang.
Well, good morning. I am absolutely delighted to join you. I wanted to thank Dominic for those kind words of introduction. More importantly, I wanted to publicly thank Dominic for his 3 years of leadership at the helm of C100. He's turned out at, he said, noon tomorrow, so let's all give a loud round of applause. I also wanted to highlight the great work. I want to thank the committee co-chairs, convention co-chairs, for taking it upon your shoulders for bringing us all together. Jeff, Yuan, Chi Fun, and Jay, and if I could put a special plug, that the Committee of 100 does so much good work. Part of this is to watch the progression over the years of the work as it unfolds. I'm going to borrow the title of an exhibit that's taking place at the San Francisco Asian Art Museum. I want to encourage you all to visit. But Committee of 100 and the yoga exhibit at the Asian Art Museum is entitled The Power of Transformation. So I'm going to borrow that, Jay, with your blessings and understand as we go forward. And then I also wanted to thank the C100 staff as we gather today. I always think about things in place of focus of time and location. And over the years, the Committee of 100 has been blessed with people who have been extraordinary storytellers. For those of us who understand this time, this place, we had a former member who was very prolific and thoughtful author, Iris Chiang, who wrote one of her 3 books, The Chinese in America. And so as we're in San Francisco and we heard the stories of our terrific mayor, at least they're just phenomenal work as the leader of this city, how we had people who were migrant workers working on the railroads. Also in Iris's book, what wasn't highlighted and generally understood in the state of California is that 1.90% of the farm workers were Chinese here in the state of California. And the reason they ended up here in San Francisco was because of the discrimination, because of the challenges of labor, because of the friction and tension that were created. So they came here to open up the restaurants, to open up the laundry shops. And so this is the city that was born because of that discrimination. And as I always like to highlight, the fact that we have on the sister cities across the bay Chinese Americans demonstrates the progress that can be made if we give an opportunity not only to Chinese Americans, but in the American heritage and the American value set, an opportunity to all. And so that's the context. Now, in regards to this specific conference, why this is important and why Committee 100 is unique in its place, there are a lot of outstanding conferences, and they have different focuses. My colleague and friend, John Long, and I both spoke at the UCLA United States-China Conference last week. A speaker later today, former Congressman David Dwyer, and I are going to speak at the Milken Global Institute on Monday about international trade. But the Committee of 100 gives you first mover advantage. First mover advantage. How I assess conferences is, what are you learning today? And then in hindsight, how did that conference apply as you do the analytics going forward? They show you and they bring to you, or we do, and staff and the convention co-chairs, the people who are acting in the ground, who are acting in the ivory tower, who are acting in the halls of Congress and elsewhere, as to what's going to transpire in America and China today. That's the first mover advantage. They give you the insights that you understand how you can influence and make your decisions so that you can act accordingly. And that is a critical difference of why it is very important. And we have to understand this context. So I graduated in high school in the early 1980s. So in my lifetime, America was over 1/3 of the world's economy. Today we are 22 to 23% of the world's economy, and China is about half that number. But as has been cited oftentimes, that this relationship, this bilateral relationship, will certainly be the most important relationship between countries for the first half of this century, if not for the entire century. And we can choose to act together, or we can choose to act in isolation. We can choose to act for our benefit, or we can choose to act to our detriment. And I think we all choose the positive choice. Now let's understand that in unison, that we can better understand, because over the past few years, as both California and the United States experienced extraordinary difficult times, this state twice in 2009 was on the threshold of fiscal collapse, and our choices were limited because of the way we think, because of our historical context. But those choices that were limited just 5 years ago are now available to us today because of the dynamically changing environment and the change between people and the change in relationships. So for instance, when I started issuing IOUs, or I had to hold back $4 billion worth of payments in February of 2009 because California only had $2.7 billion in cash to pay $10 billion worth of bills, behind the scenes, some of the most powerful tech companies in the state of California approached my office saying, we want to help finance California's bailout. And we were very interested, but I said, I can't have you operate in secrecy, right? Because this is the public domain. People won't understand if I gave an advantage to technology companies. We can't have things shrouded in secrecy. We also were approached by many Chinese entities who came through various lobbyists and government relations people, said, we also want to assist California. And I said that to them, the same thing. And they said, we want to help, but we don't want to be disclosed. I said the same thing to the tech executives. Right? You have to understand your government. You just have to build this relationship over time, and at some point in the future, a better day for humanity, everybody will certainly come to understand. And I think people have sensed that change. Now, we have to understand, in that economic context I just spoke to a few years ago, that America started recovering, even though we've been 5 years out of the recession, that a couple of years ago, China was the preeminent economic growth engine on this planet. Even when you had the severe downturn in the Chinese economy, and severe is relative, right? From 10.5% to 6.5%. Everybody would love to have 6.5% growth. That they were still half the world's economic growth driver. And so 2 years ago, as California turned our tide, in part, it was a lot of our multinational corporations who were engaged in business in China and Mexico and elsewhere. And California's pickup last year was because of our consumer activity. And we know that America got into trouble 5 years ago. We had the big financial crisis in September of 2009. China had debt issues from 1998 to 2005. So all these things, as we understand from just our basic business classes, the debt cycle, the commodity cycle, the business cycle, the CapEx cycle, happen to all of us. It's not race-based. It's not geographically based in the academic sense, right? It impacts all of us, and it affects all of us. And so that's why the Committee of 100 is so relevant, right? We can continue to do things and act in silos, or we can learn from each other. That's why we can magnify the opportunities, or we can do what we've done in the past, much to our detriment. When you had the Chinese exclusion, as referred yesterday, you closed the doors of opportunities. You lost the stories, you lost the lines of lineage, or we can change this. So as I conclude, just our thoughts. As we move forward, we can decide that we can harness our individual and collective power so that we can achieve greatness, or we can repeat core lessons from the past. The Committee of 100 always chooses progress opportunity, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you for being here.
We will now begin with our very first session of discussion of the conference, and our moderator will be Jenny Ming, a Committee 100 member. Jenny and will lead the session. To proceed to the stage, please. She'll be joined by Harry Hui and Tom Doctoroff.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning for an exciting, insightful session on search, shop, and spend. That's probably my 3 favorite words in the dictionary. So it's about unleashing the Chinese digital consumer. This is probably one of the most talked about topic in the world of business today. So we have with us 2 experts in the field and space. Tom Doctoroff, the CEO of JWT Asia Pacific. Tom is one of the Asia's most respected, well-connected marketing professionals. He's a leading expert in cross-border or East-West management, brand architecture, and brand building. Tom is very sought after to speak in global symposiums and conferences. He is also a best-selling author too. So for more details on his bio, please refer to our program book. Our other speaker, Harry Hu, founding managing partner of ClearVue Partners, a private equity investing in growth companies in the consumer sector. Harry has worked in Asia for the past 20 years and has a diverse experiences and accomplishments. He's a business executive, investor, strategist, author, and a TV personality. So before he founded ClearVue Partners, Harry served as Chief Marketing Officer and President of PepsiCo Investment in China for PepsiCo China Beverage Division. So prior to that, Harry was President of Universal Music Asia, the world's largest music company. Harry has been awarded many honors. Again, for more detail on his bio, please also refer to our program book. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with this session with both Harry and Tom presenting their overview on the Chinese digital consumer. So after that, we're going to have a discussion, and if we have any time left, we could take Q&A from the audience. So with that, I'm going to have Harry start.
To the committee, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to be here and share with you a topic that's very, very close to my heart. I want to thank Mercy and Jenny for being such a wonderful host, and Angie, where are you, for taking such good care of me. So I look forward to a good dialogue with you, and I look forward to a session of meaningful exchange because there's so many experts in the room. I'm sure there are questions, and I'll have a lot to learn from all of you in the audience. As a thought starter, I thought what I would do is share with you a PowerPoint that represents the proprietary research of an investment firm. Now, behind this, maybe we should turn off this mic so you don't get the echo. Is that better? Yeah, great, thanks. So what I'm going to do is start the conversation by talking a little bit about a PowerPoint that represents the research of our firm. Behind this research is reams and reams of data. Now, I'm not going to go through that with you, but instead you're going to get the kiddie version where there'll be a lot of photographs, and hopefully we'll blow by it quickly and we'll have a dialogue together. Chinese consumers in the 21st century is probably one of the most exciting stories that's going around the world today. I don't think we can talk enough about it. Because the last 30 plus years of change in China has had profound impact in some key aspects of how we live in China. This is well documented, and many of you, I'm sure, have experienced this either in your own world, in your travels, or in your family circle. The political system has transformed fundamentally. If you look at the 5-year plans over the last 30 years, their agenda, their themes have fundamentally shifted as the economy and the economic needs have changed. Our economy has been catapulted now to be the second largest economy in the world. The livelihood has completely changed. How we eat, how we dress, what we wear, how we shop is completely different. And not last but not least, we're finally seeing for the first time a sense of nationalism. Now, in the past, revolution was glorious. Today, to get rich is to be glorious. What are the fundamental drivers that's taking place? Well, apart from infrastructure investment that we're seeing, China has, for the most part, been a very, very good manufacturing country for the rest of the world. So the export-led economy that's worked for many, many decades, for the last 2.5 decades, has been a big driver of growth. We've seen a significant surge of influx of foreign invested capital. Most of all, and last but not least, massive urban migration. Now, the country's gone from making and selling millions of flying pigeon bicycles to now being the world's second largest market of flying horses. Ferrari is now in China the second biggest market in the world behind North America. In the 70s, it was all about 为人民服务, serve the people. Now, in the 70s, if you made $16 US per capita per annum, you had 3 aspirational purchases. What were the 3 things that would have defined you and made you? Does anyone want to take a guess? A watch? Not yet. Somebody said a television, a sewing machine, and a bicycle. You made it if you had those 3 things. Fast forward that to the 80s a little bit, and if you had yuan kuai, you were considered to be very, very wealthy. So what were the 3 big purchases that you would have had to have to keep up with the Joneses? It was a refrigerator, a washing machine, and of course, the Doctoroff, the big mobile phone by Motorola. Now, moving that forward to 2000, enough said about the economy, right? All the brands in the world, regardless of sector, luxury, FMCG, fashion brands, everyone is rushing in to capture this big consumption boom. Not only domestically, but certainly around the world. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Well, it's important to really think about the cohort groups. It's really not a homogeneous market, as obviously it is. It isn't. There are 4 generations that are living under the same roof very often. About 5 or 6% of the population would be the founding generations. They would be a little bit new, very, very traditional in their values. Then there's about 20% of the Cultural Revolution generation, high on guanxi, lower on academic credentials. And then the open door generation, the ones that you probably did business with for the first time when you went to China. They were the first ones that done the Western suit, they had the lapels on their sleeves, and they were the ones that did your first joint joint venture. But the segment that we're most excited about is really the striver. And they are what we call the post-80s, 80后. Now, there are a lot of them, approximately 480 million of them. Their view of the world is very, very different than our own. 82% of them would be optimistic about the future. They're strivers, they're forward-looking, they think the best is yet to come. Very often they grew up with both parents working and were raised by their grandparents, very much like the way my wife was. For them, a gang of 4 is a thing of the past. The Cultural Revolution is an art form. And what we're also seeing now is that there is what we think is the phrase, a Confucian conflict. What do we mean by that? On the one hand, millennials today want to be harmonious, humble, give face, show respect. But on the flip side, they want to have a little bit of sex appeal. That ego is starting to come out. You can see the way they blog, the new imageries, the new fashion magazines, and what they talk about. So the Confucian conflict is very much alive and real. So thought starter number 1. China has gone from owning very little to buying everything. And we've gone from a country that had excess manufacturing capabilities that supplied the world, and we've gone from made in China to now bought in China. Thought starter number 2. Technology is certainly connecting reality. We've had a one-child policy for 30+ years. We're seeing signs of relaxation and exceptions being granted. I argue that this is one of the loneliest generations that we've ever witnessed in history. Loneliness is big business. I buy a lot of 10-cent stock. Now, they cherish the friends and families and the bonds that they have. A 19-year-old in Chongqing said to us, "It is a shame to be without friends." Technology for them is very much comfort food. This is well documented. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we have 1.2 billion mobile subscribers. 640 million of them are uniques. There are 420 million internet subs. And for the first time in 2012, we now have more mobile internet subscribers than we do PC-based subscribers. And by the way, they're spending as much time online as they are watching television, approximately 25 hours a week. What are they doing most of the time? They're on instant messaging, they're searching the news, they're listening to music and watching videos. But what's the fastest growing activities? This is really, really quite staggering. We're seeing 170% growth in mobile consumption. Now, albeit it's only 10% or about 9% of all e-commerce today that's transacted on the mobile phone. 69% of them at the time are buying things together. The Chinese love a bargain. Shopping. This is truly, really quite scary. About 13 billion people took the railroads last year in China. 80 million people traveled abroad as outbound tourists, spending about $80 billion. 80 million is not that bad, but if you fast forward that to 2020, the forecast is that there will be 200 million Chinese people traveling abroad by the year 2020. Scary thought, stock your shelves. Now, e-commerce is very much a way of life to the post-80s. There are 300 million of us, and it represents approximately $300 billion US in commerce, or 10% of total commerce. So what's the big news? What's the hype? Why are we even talking about this today? Why is this a subject of conversation? I think this is a staggering statistic. Only 3.5 years ago, less than 2% of all total retail commerce in China, excluding automotive and petroleum, was done online, only 3.5 years ago. Today, it is almost 10%. In that same year of growth, it took the US approximately 10 or 11 years to achieve similar levels of penetration. So, to the Chinese, e-commerce is very much a lifestyle, especially the millennial. So, we've gone from buying things to social shopping. We've gone from offline to online, and now in mobile. Most venture capitalist friends of mine in Shanghai would say, they don't even look at a company if they don't have a mobile internet strategy, because that certainly is really where the future is going. Well, the Chinese consumers, and particularly the millennials, are enthusiastic, but not necessarily informed. They follow many, many brands. They're not very, very loyal. When I was running PepsiCo, I was surprised that the number of switchers between Coke and Pepsi at a given moment was 78%. In other words, the consumer walking into the supermarket, if there was a Coke there, 78% of the time they buy a Coke. If there's a Pepsi there, they'll take the Pepsi. No brand loyalty, despite all the marketing that we thought we were doing and loving our brand. 24% of them will talk about their positive or negative experience, and 38% of the time they will listen to what the internet word of mouth will say when they make a purchasing decision. They love brands. They also like low prices every day. You've heard about the November 11th one-day sale on Alibaba. The Chinese bought $3 billion worth of stuff, and often at a 50% discount. The millennials are trained bargain hunters. They're the ultimate play hard and work hard crowd. Their meals have been compressed. The average number of minutes that they spend on meals have reduced by about 35% over the last 10 years. And their trips to quick-serve restaurants have gone up 7 times in the same period. So there's a real quest for me time. In conclusion, these are some of the thought starters that I thought I'd end with, and I will leave it to Tom to bring it home and then leave it for conversation. What we're seeing is China has gone from owning very little to now buying just about everything. Made in China to being bought in China. From mass market, what was a monochromatic market with very, very limited numbers of SKUs on shelves, to now having massive, massive choices. We're price sensitive in the past, and now we're also time sensitive. We've gone from shopping, buying the basic needs, to now social shopping, and of course, offline, online, to mobile. Thank you very much. I look forward to a good dialogue.
I think we can put the presentation up. It's always very intimidating to go after great speakers, and I can't say that there's 1% of what Harry said that I disagree with. So in the next 10 minutes or so, or 8 minutes or so, I'll try to take some of what he said and apply it to the shape and the structure of the digital universe in China. Because it is a parallel universe to the United States digital universe. It's not the same, although certain things look the same. You know, in advertising, well, actually, I'm not allowed to say advertising anymore. That's an outmoded word in today's era of digital empowerment. I will say instead that I am an engineer of media-neutral, idea-centric participation platforms. But in any case, in advertising, we have something called insight, 小培是洞察, and I'm going to build on the Confucian conflict that Harry mentioned to say that I believe in China there is a unifying insight for Chinese people overall. There are two fundamentally different impulses that coexist at the same time and actually affect the digital universe in China. The first is projection of status. 我们一直知道中国人在他们的心里每一个中国人有一条龙 There is a dragon in every heart of Chinese people. Chinese people are meritocratic, they are strivers, they want to climb the hierarchy, they want to get to the top of Mount Glory and project their status. That's why there are flying horses that are selling so well. But of course also, as Harry mentioned, it's a profoundly hierarchical society. We've all heard of the Bagua and the Wulong, but China is a hierarchical society in which the individual does not exist independent of his responsibilities and obligations to other people. So the way of moving forward is to master the hierarchy, become an expert at the rules. And this is the same today as it was 2,000 years ago throughout the dynastic China. And brands that are able, companies that are able to resolve this tension between projection of status and protection of economic interests and your status on the hierarchy are brands that touch the heart of Chinese people. And I say one more time that the internet in China reflects this Chinese Confucian conflict, a unifying conflict. So what is the internet to Chinese people in their hearts? It is a blank canvas of self-expression. The Economist recently memorably called it a giant cage. It is an area where you can express what you want to do, who you are, what you think, but in a way that is safe and largely protected due to the distance of avatars and digital dimension. So what you see on the internet is very often emotional. It is extremely social. If you take a look at well, I shouldn't say this, but the CNN reference, that took place after the Tibetan protests back in 2008 before the Olympics. But over there on the right, you have, protests against the Malaysian government for MH370, again, causing a cyclone in the Twitterverse or the Weiboverse. But the thing that's interesting right there is the middle photograph. That's a celebrity called Wang Zheng. Long story short, it achieved the largest Weibo tweeting in history. This is a Chinese celebrity that had the audacity to cheat on his lovely wife, and then he got exposed in the digital universe, and this caused the largest number of retweets in human history, 2 million. That's emotional, that's psychological, that's letting it out in a deep, deep way. So there's a lot of self-expression, and the way that Chinese people engage in the digital universe is in fact quite emotional. You take a look at the 5 largest activities there. The first is instant messaging. It's a way to communicate with people. Mobile is social, so it's a way for people to feel not isolated and to reinforce their bonds with society. And blogging, every Chinese person is a blogger. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Everybody has to say what they have to say, but again, they're doing it safely. They're doing it from a distance. It's not just raising your hand and speaking in a public square. And if you take a look at the role of social networks in China and in branding, it's much larger than it is in the United States. If you go by this study that was done in 2012, social networks are a good source of information on brand experience. Look at the difference between China, 23% in America, 8%, which is just to say that people clinging to the internet for reliable views of their peers and online opinion leaders, KOLs. And even if you take a look at the next statistic, I post product ratings and reviews at least once a month. 75% say yes in China versus only 20% in the United States. This points to a different relationship with all things digital. It is a site of safe self-expression. This is why Taobao, which is the world's largest e-commerce site, and by the way, China is the largest e-commerce market now in the world, having just surpassed the United States last year, is such a phenomenon. But what I'd like to say that's a little bit less known is that e-commerce in China did not take off until fundamental self-protection imperatives were in fact realized. eBay, about 10 years ago, crashed and burned in China because it was fundamentally a Western business model. They didn't offer the security that was required to reassure people that their digital transactions were safe, number one. And number two, they were talking about bargaining, auctioning, the thrill of victory, when in fact we all know that Chinese are they're pragmatic, all right? So what Chinese want from the internet is transparency, and they want, as Harry said, a bargain. In China, intelligence is the sexiest attribute. The smartest boy in the class is the sexiest boy in the class. So Taobao, all right, took off when these fundamental imperatives that are cultural were reinforced in terms of Alipay, which is reassuring that you don't have to pay anything until you kick the merchandise and make sure that everything is okay. So digital transactions first had to be safe. And then we've all heard about Singles Day, 1111. Now this is massive retail therapy. This is shopping to help this lonely generation that Harry talked about salve their hearts with digital transactionalism. So in China, transactionalism is hot, not cool. Take a look at WeChat, which is owned by Tencent. WeChat within 24 months had 300 million people using it. It's different from Weibo, which is now on the decline. Weibo is broadcast, Twitter-like. WeChat is actually much more intimate. It's self-selecting. It's safer. Not everybody can see what you say. 300 million people. Again, reinforcing this imperative of safe self-protection on the internet, which is, you can say anything you want to say, but you're careful about who is going to see it. That's why WeChat is so popular. And how does WeChat make its money? WeChat makes its money through, of course, gaming, through, in addition, this, selling of emoticons and pictures. These are fun little things that we Americans would say, it's a little bit off point in terms of making our lives better, but it's ultimately about lubricating social interaction. It helps online dialogue and exchange. And I'd like to raise a hat to Harry. He didn't know that I was going to present this chart, but this is one of the most successful online activities in internet history. Not just in China, but in the entire world. It was conducted in 2007 or 8, I believe. It's called Get on the Can. Long story short, Pepsi shook the internet universe by offering people the chance to have their faces emblazoned on special edition cans of Pepsi Cola. 750 million participated in this. There were 150 million people who voted, and 30 million people actually went through the trouble of uploading their photographs to try and get on the can. This shows that this is in fact an emotional universe. And another one that I'd like to say is Fangke. Fangke is one of the largest youth retailers. They had another very successful promotion that killing two birds with one stone. Long story short, what they were able to do is put an online ad of themselves displaying proudly, projecting themselves in Fangke clothing, but also if you sold anything based on your online ad, you got a cut of the commission. So it's both about ego gratification on one hand, and on the other hand, very pragmatically earning a little bit of hard cash. This is what causes happiness in China. The resolution of projection of status on one hand and protection of identity. And so if people in China, if internet providers can abide by this fundamental Confucian conflict between regimentation and ambition, we are able to make money and at the same time touch the heart of 600 million netizens, 600 million and growing. Thank you very much.
I think you would agree with me, both of them are incredible marketers, okay? You can sell me anything. So as you can see, it's really clearly that there's contrast between the Chinese and Western consumer online behavior. And so Tom pointed out, really is a cultural difference. China's is more emotional connection to the internet, and Westerners are much more functional connection to the internet. So Harry highlighted generational differences, particularly the millennial, as key players. So on a macro level, other trends manifest across Asia and globally, perhaps in Latin America, Africa, Middle East. In other words, is this global phenomenon or more is only China specific? So I'd love to hear what you think of that.
Well, I'm not a global expert. However, I would say that when you take a look at it, is true that we often commingle emerging market insights, what happens when the middle class rises, versus cultural insights. And I would say that in non-Western societies across the world, the key unifying factor is a hierarchical worldview. It is not individualistic. When I say individualistic, I mean, again, society encouraging the individual to define themselves independent of society's expectations. So this is true in UAE, the United Arab Emirates, it's true in South Africa, it's true in India, and it's also true in China. But what's different about the Confucian cluster is that ambition part that Harry talked about. Ambition goes down very deep into Chinese society. Everybody wants to be the emperor of his own corner. So ambition goes into the rural fringe in China as soon as people start getting hopes of being able to move forward and advance in life. So I think that this incredible urge to surge that is evident in Singles Day 1111 and the explosive growth in internet and social networking is not just about hierarchy, it's also about ambition and self-expression. So I'd say it's distinct in China.
If there are a lot of similarities between what's happening in China and the rest of the world, maybe I can highlight a little bit about where we see some of the differences are. E-commerce in China is very much lifestyle. E-commerce is not something that you do in addition to shopping. E-commerce is very often how you would shop and the way you would shop in China. So I think that's one big difference. The second big difference is that the categories that are now the highest penetrated in China are apparel, shoes, and then consumer electronics. Travel is relatively low, whereas in the US, travel is still one of the biggest e-commerce categories of consumption. So that's somewhat different. And I suppose when the Chinese have enough of all of their shoes and the closets and stuff, they're going to want to wear it and go somewhere. And then travel will come up. And that's why stocks like Chiang has done very, very well because of all of this domestic and inbound consumption of travel.
And I think the point that Harry just made on social shopping is fundamental. It's not an alternative to offline shopping, it is shopping. And in lower tier cities, another statistic is 57% of all online shopping is new shopping. It's not replacing offline shopping. Partially because it's facilitated through mobile technology, which is distinct in China, but partially because the shopping is so fundamental to people's identity. And apparel is, yes, relatively cheap, unlike travel, but it is about identity badge and getting a good value to look good in public.
So it sounds like these trends are really absolutely transforming Chinese society, which I think is really, really interesting compared to the US. Online shopping is a channel of shopping, it's not the lifestyle of shopping. So Tom has suggested that protection versus projection status dynamic is inherent in Confucian society. So Harry, what do you think of that?
Well, up until Xi Jinping took office, I think there was a very, very relevant study that talked about how only one other country in the world that would deem having a body full of luxury brand logos on your body to be a definition of success rather than superficiality, and that was Russia. That was prior to the recent crackdown that we've had in consumption in the luxury sector. And so, nowadays, I believe that the Chinese still believe in more self-consumption, experimental luxury consumption, rather than consumption of luxury goods for the sake of gifting. Gifting, by any estimates, whether it's J.P. Morgan or other McKinsey reports that you would refer to, can be accounted for anywhere between 30 to 40% of consumption. I mean, the Chinese society is very much based on guanxi, right? And guanxi is very much about how much deposit do I make into that relationship, and over time, hopefully, I would withdraw. And some people believe that over my life, my guanxi would have a set of net positive accounts. Some people would believe that I want to leave this world with a set of negative accounts, right? So, but the guanxi and the notion of guanxi building is very much what's driven the gifting market. And the gifting occasion has driven approximately 1/3 of consumption in China. And so since the recent policy crackdown, we've seen significant drops in luxury goods in the categories of liquor, watches, and other small luxury items of gifting. So I think for self-consumption, that category remains very, very robust, and it's growing. But for gifting, that seems to have been hard hit. Now, a year ago, people were saying, well, this is going to be short-lived. A year later, it's still going on. So we actually don't know how much longer that's going to go on for.
Thank you. So let's talk about the difference in East and West brand perception, such as PepsiCo, Nike, etc. What examples highlight the contrast between how consumer in China and the West perceive and identify with these certain brands?
Well, this transcends the questions of digital China. But in terms of, there are two golden rules of marketing in China that don't apply in the rest of the world. The first golden rule, and they're related, the first golden rule is to justify a price premium, you have to maximize public consumption. Chinese people will pay a price premium for things that help them project identity into broader society. Starbucks, for example. Starbucks has performed the Houdini act of marketing. Right now, there are 1,500 Starbucks stores in China. And a little secret is the Chinese don't like coffee. How is this possible? This is possible because the business model of China has changed fundamentally for Starbucks. Howard Schultz doesn't talk about a third space, a site of relaxation and intimate self-fulfillment between home and office. The Starbucks stores in China are bigger. They boast a larger menu. There aren't individual stuffed chairs. There are but there are more tables that are long that can accommodate more people. Starbucks is a site of gangs going in there to collectively proclaim affiliation with the new generation elite. And that Starbucks badge that comes out of every cup of coffee is projected into society. Haagen-Dazs is another example of public consumption. No Chinese young person is going to pay 60 renminbi for 2 scoops of ice cream and bring it home to indulge oneself in front of an illegal DVD with a girlfriend. It's not going to happen. So public consumption justifies price premium. The second golden rule is related, is that benefits are internalized in the West oftentimes. They are externalized in China. What I mean to that is all products in China are a means to an end, even cheap ones. In the West, when you sell a shower gel, you sell it based on sensuous indulgence in the shower. Ah, that's nice. In China, it's an energizing start to your day. You start the day with a kick. So benefits need to be so-called externalized. And this is true only in China. Only in Asia.
I couldn't agree more with what Thomas just said. I may only add that there have been a lot of case studies about successful foreign brands that entered the market and failed, and a lot of companies that have localized and have succeeded. So I don't think we need to go into that well-worn thesis. What I think is very, very exciting that we're seeing in China is that there are categories. Take fashion, for example. We think that there are a lot of very, very exciting fashion brands in China that have been for years been OEM manufacturers for foreign luxury brands. Well, they have gotten the know-how, they've met the specifications, and they've been exporting for years. They haven't gotten quite the branding and the marketing down yet. I venture to guess that some of these companies are probably a few seasons away from becoming globally competitive. Now, at the moment, their spelling might be off, the brand name is kind of awkward, no vowels, and it's hard to pronounce. The packaging is quite wrong, the solar tanks are not moving in the right places. But I think it's only a matter of time when consultants and agencies such as Tom will come in, bring their world-class practices, and layer on to the manufacturing capabilities that they've been doing, and compete globally. Now, that's the big question. How come there are no domestic Chinese luxury brands to speak of? Many are trying, but none have succeeded yet. And so as a venture capitalist, this is what we get excited about. As we look around the corner, we're seeing some very, very capable, smart young brands that may have a chance.
May I build on what Harry is saying? The rise of the Chinese brand, unfortunately, the Chinese have another expression, 来而方长. It's a long road to Rome. I will say that I'm both optimistic and also a little bit realistic. Optimistic because JWT, a leading engineer of media-neutral and data-centric participation platforms. Just kidding. 45% of our revenue in China comes from local companies, but none of them, to Harry's point, has passed through what I call the inflection point of strong brands. And what I mean by strong brands is the ability to charge a price premium in markets that are abroad, not one brand, none of them. And I think that the reason for this is profoundly cultural. I think it goes back again to cultural imperatives in terms of focus on concrete as opposed to celebration of abstract ideas. So long story short, Chinese companies are very sales driven. They tend to be relatively siloed, and it makes it very hierarchical, old style traditionalist in terms of authority, and it makes it very difficult for brand equity to take root. That is long-term consistency in messaging, which again is very abstract. So I would like to also celebrate the day where the local Chinese brand is a global player, or even more modestly, the local Chinese brand can command a premium in its own market, but that day has not yet come.
I want to talk more about Singles Day because as a retailer, we have a lot to learn. So just to give you some idea, so in the US, the single biggest day online is called Cyber Monday. It's the Monday after Black Friday. So that day we did, a little over $1.7 billion. We were thrilled with it. It's about 18% increase. But in Singles Day, Harry said, both of you said, it's over $5 billion in China. So what can we learn from it? Is there anything that we could take away that will work in the West?
I don't think so. I mean,
of course, I don't want to hear that.
No, I mean, of course, there's a lot of offer construction that's very relevant. It's mostly buy one get one free. But I think the fact that Singles Day is so huge is distinctly Chinese. Again, it's done by Tencent and which is a leading internet provider, which is, by the way, sanctioned by the government. Let's always remember that all large internet companies exist with the complicit and tacit agreement of the government. So this is something that is sanctioned to do. Right? It is an activity that de facto has been endorsed and mandated by a top-down, patriarchally benevolent government structure. So it's not just bottom-up fun time, all right? It's a way of stimulating the economy. So that's point one, it's endorsed. Secondly, it's deeply emotional. And it gets back to what Harry's point is that this is a generation of singletons, of people that feel more and more isolated from society and a little bit more anxious about the future than previous generations. So it's massive retail therapy that I think puts a day at the spa in Los Angeles to shame.
Having worked in the U.S. and been involved with department stores and when I was a buyer at Macy's in New York, I think the Chinese actually have a lot to learn from the U.S. as far as special event, one-day sales, blue hour light, and so on and so forth. But let me just share some statistics with you about the one-day sale with Alibaba. In 2009, there were only 27 brands that participated on the November 11th Commerce Day. And there was approximately 50 million of transactions that was done that day. Last year, it was 10,000 merchants that participated. So the number of SKUs that became available online from November 11th went up significantly, and that's why we did about $19 billion. The second fact that's important to note is that they were done at very, very steep discounts. Chinese brands in China do not have the same outlet programs that some of the more established fashion brands have around the world. Ralph Lauren, for example, has a very, very dedicated outlet line that's made with lower cost, lower specifications. That's not the case in China. Today, if you were to go online and buy a pair of Adidas Crazy Night shoes, for example, it would cost you online 530 kwai. Whereas if you went to a store, it would be 820 kwai. That same 820 kwai was discounted 50% on Singles Day. I'm actually very, very concerned. I actually think that that may not be sustainable because there may not be enough inventory every year to liquidate at that cost of liquidation. In fact, many of my friends that run successful brands in China that sold a ton of stuff would argue that it's a very, very good way of liquidating goods, but it may not be a sophisticated approach as we know it today. I'll give you another example. Lancome, youth activated concentrates. Online, it sells for 628 kwai. The same item in the department store would sell for 1,080 kwai. So it is well known and understood that if you were to buy online, it is just a lot cheaper.
I don't understand that. Okay. Okay, turn it on so I can see. I was just, that makes it quite interesting when Alibaba a few weeks ago just announced that they're buying a department store when they've been an online player. So why aren't they doing that?
Well, the O2O model is something that everybody is talking about in China. Right? The O2O model is, for those of you who do not know China, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating something you already know, we're about 5 companies that accounts for about 50 to 60% of all logistics that's shipped and sold in China. The rest of it are usually pretty fragmented. And so the big conversation, where money is going into 2 things in China. It's going into mobile internet consumption, and it's also going into logistics. Oh, sorry, and big data, if you were to really go into it, because we're relatively unsophisticated in terms of big data analysis. So the biggest concern about the 11/11 phenomenon is that the consumers are benefiting. However, it's coming at the cost of viable business models. Because when you reduce the price that low, it's really all about driving customer acquisition. So the belief is that if I lower it enough, I will get enough users, I will build scale, and eventually the business model will creep up. So a lot of companies in China are not really successful or viable e-commerce companies, but they're merely private equity backed or financed in other ways. So there are signs now that there are pressures on companies to make sure that they have healthy margins, costs of logistics are within reason, and that the acquisition cost is reasonable. I'll give you an example. If you were to list on page 1 of Taobao for 1 day, 1 banner ad, that would cost you about 60,000 kwai. You can buy a 2-page spread on GQ magazine for a month for a third of that. Very, very different model. So the cost of acquiring customers online is no longer as the cheap route to market that once everybody thought. Because the rental costs and your acquisition costs, in fact, are quite similar to what your fixed rental costs were if you were operating a retail store.
And taking those comments and backing up a little bit, I think it's important to understand that in China, there's no way to overcome scale as an important competitive imperative. Right now, the cost of media is prohibitively expensive for brands who are not yet in China and have not yet built broad awareness. And this is something that I think most medium-sized Western or foreign players haven't quite grasped. There's no shortcut into China. And just as Harry was talking about Singles Day and the fact that ultimately it's not a profitable proposition for the vast majority of online retailers, the internet and digital marketing, there's no shortcut there either. You need to come in with scale, you need to come in big, you need to build broad awareness, and then you also need to invest in a value proposition. The internet is not the way that you can somehow escape these fundamental or timeless marketing truths.
Okay, of course we're running out of time, but I have to ask this closing question. If we look 5 to 10 years out over the horizon, how do you both describe China's e-commerce business?
Well, I'm not an expert, as again, I'm in advertising and I exist beyond the fringes of legitimacy. Harry is a real businessman. Let me say that I think certain things are going to stay more or less the same, because we have to take a look at China's growth model. It's all about urbanization. And what that means is there are constantly new waves of new consumers coming onto the Chinese landscape. So, and then ultimately coming into the middle class and the upper middle class. So there are different segments in China, and those same segments will exist until the urbanization growth paradigm really runs out of steam. But a little bit more broadly, I'd say that I don't have any proof for this hypothesis, but I think that getting back to the fact that the internet giants exist in partnership or with the complicity of the Chinese government, I think if you take a look what's happening right now with Alibaba and its microfinancing and its loans and its interest that's being paid now and offering more than state-owned banks, I think that the services is a huge area of interest that the government cannot do with its bricks and mortar offline alternatives. Services is a big gap in the Chinese consumer landscape. And I suspect that the business models of Baidu and other large companies are really going to be focused on providing these services that are sanctioned by the government. So something that can be controlled but also experimented with. Chinese love to experiment with small, micro Singaporean models. And I do think that there's an ample room for services to be provided on the internet in a way that doesn't exist in the West.
I would agree
You got
with
more
that.
statistics, right?
No, it's such a big topic. It's a great question. Just top line, I think that what we've seen today in e-commerce in China is just simply the beginning. I think 10 years from now, we're not going to talk about e-commerce as if it is something different. We're just going to talk about it in suits or commerce. So the 10% of retail sales today will likely be 20, 30, 40%. It's anyone's guess. It will be enabled by some of the biggest players in their investments in logistics and mobile. The second thing I would venture to guess is that there are a lot of new categories that are going to become very, very important in China. Pharmaceutical, for example, today is less than 2% distributed and sold online. Fresh groceries, meats, seafoods, vegetables are only 6 to 7% sold online today. I think many of these categories will become part of the basic staple of shopping online. I think that the retailers, the traditional retailers, are going to be under significant pressure. I was talking to my good buddy who runs Nike in China. He was saying to me that they're closing hundreds and hundreds of their wholesale retail stores, but the number of their flagship stores are doubling. So I think the Chinese, as they shop more online, they will look a little bit more like what the US retail model would look like, and that is go after retail theater, retail experiences, specialty, big shop where you go in, get the experience of the brand, and then go home and possibly buy online. That would be another one of my predictions. I think that finally, last but not least, I think if many of you have visited e-commerce companies in China, there's not a lot of E behind the companies, right? There's a web page, but there's hundreds of staff on a live chat room. Everything is done one-to-one. You call. You know, the big joke is Home Depot came and was selling do-it-yourself. Well, the joke is you were merely paying somebody else to do it for you. You weren't really quite doing it yourself. And so the E behind companies in Chinese companies today is very, very low. Not a lot of it is bought on buy now, click here, ship there tomorrow. So I would hope that in 10 years' time, these companies will become more sophisticated and that we would have a better CRM system, because many of those customers today, companies today do not have a very, very good profile of how you shop, what you buy, and how to reference sell and upsell. So these would be some of my predictions of areas of opportunity. And then last but not least, consolidation. Absolutely will happen, is that a lot of these companies simply won't survive because they don't have a legitimate business to be in the market in the first place.
No, I just want to add an exclamation point to Harry's point. No matter what happens in the future, the Chinese are not going to fundamentally engage in the internet in a new way unless their entire social structure changes, which is not going to happen. Reassurance of any transaction is going to be fundamental now, 2030 and 2050. So we have to make sure that as China evolves, as China becomes bigger, as China becomes more modern, more internationalized, China is not becoming Western, and the universe of the digital consumer will not become Western either. It will assume its own form that is modern and international, and to a certain extent parallel.
Thank you so much. And I have to say that, we could probably talk for days about this topic, and our time has run out, and I want to thank both of our guests, Tom and Harry, for sharing such insightful information with us. Thank you.